Okay, my name is Mary Mills Price. I'm 92 years old, and today is January 28th, and we're at the Lake Mills Public Library, and my relationship to my partner, my son is here, and Gerard is a fellow Rotarian. And I want you to know that I'm fully vaccinated and masked. And I was born in Lake Mills. I married Calvin Price of Baraboo. We had 5 children, Kathy, Cindy, Jeff, John, and Barb. Cal died at age 42, and I returned to grad school, moving with 5 children to Madison. I taught special ed for 18 years at Shank Middle School in Madison. I received my master's degree and returned to Lake Mills. My family's on both sides in the Ashland, Lake Mills area since 1840.
My name's Gerard Saylor. I'm 51 years old. It's January 28th, 2022. Fellow Rotarian with Mary Price, and we're in Lake Mills, Wisconsin at the Public Library. So, Mary, you had a number of things you wanted to talk about just related to family history?
Well, I have some interesting things that have happened over the years while I've been around Lake Mills. And I was thinking of the changes in the practices for Halloween especially. And there was a bear pit behind the Fargo mansion, and I remember my dad telling me that he put a ladder down there about when he was probably 10 or 12 years old. And I never did find out what happened after that, except that they think the bear might have been left from a circus that was in town, that left town in the middle of the night because they'd gone bankrupt. And when I was younger, I had a sister that was a couple years older than I am, and she and her friends went around and did all kinds of damaging things. They turned over the benches at the campus, and they burned the leaves in the gutters and soaped all the windows. And we've been 2 years younger. We had a group, and then we went around and followed them and corrected everything. And we put back the benches and washed the windows. And we went up to the tennis courts, which were behind the middle school, present middle school, and someone had put a glue-like substance on the court and had started it on fire. My friend that was with us, Jimmy, came along with his jacket and flapped the flames out. When he got home, his mother was just furious that he'd ruined his nice jacket, and so he got checked out of the show, from going to the show, which was the big punishment in those days. And I think he was checked out for a month. So Barb and I went up to talk to the mother and said, if it hadn't been for Jimmy putting that fire out, we would have had all kinds of trouble. But she wouldn't renege, and she had him checked out for the show. That was the big punishment in those days. You couldn't go to the show on Friday night. It used to cost 10 cents, and they changed the name of the show, the theater, from the Majestic to the lake. So we would say we'd pay 10 cents to go sit in the lake. Then I had a great uncle that walked to San Francisco in 1849 for the gold rush. And he came back and married my great-grandma, and they had 4 children. And my great-grandpa would go off and hunt and fish. He was a true outdoorsman. And my great-grandmother finally said, you go off one more time and you don't bother to come back. So he went off, and he came back, and she wouldn't let him in. So he ended up living over in what we called the poorhouse in Jefferson at that time. And then I read in her diary, perhaps I was too harsh. So, but great-grandpa did die at the poorhouse in Jefferson. And
so how long did he live there, do you think?
How long I'm not sure how long he had spent there. How much time he spent at Jefferson, did you mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how long he was there. Just don't have that.
But she was fed up, and she didn't have him back.
Yeah, she just had it. So don't bother to come back. You go, don't bother. And he went anyway. So Then as far as in the days of the Depression, there were a lot of people who were what we call hobos that would come at the south end of the lake on the trains. And I remember my mother putting food out for these people, and I think they had a system where they knew which houses they could stop at and which houses they better not stop at. So then my grandfather was a professional baseball player, and he was on the championship team for the Pacific Coast League in 1888, and he also was on the first team of the Brewers when they first got started. And when he had a son, my dad was named Ashley Mills. His father's name was Alsop, who had come from the Koshkanon area and started a mills here in Lake Mills. And my grandmother wanted to name his son Alsop. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. My grandfather wanted his son named Alsop, but Grandma didn't like a nickname that he ended up with. He ended up being called Opp for Alsop. And so they changed it to Ashley to keep the same initials, A.V., and then my dad ended up with the nickname Sticky. so they didn't think that was such a good, but my grandmother was the only one that ever called him Ashley. So he was known as Sticky, and he would get his mail in Lake Mills, just Sticky, Lake Mills, Wisconsin.
He was the only one.
And he pitched for the University of Wisconsin. So I've been on a bender to try to get baseball back to the University of Wisconsin. I'm so disappointed that they haven't restarted that program.
So they were involved in the mill that was here?
Mm-hmm.
The first mill?
The mills, the first.
Well, I get, well, it's called Lake Mills because of the mill on the lake.
Right.
And that's the mill that your family started.
Not the family, no. But we always got, and people would always ask me that, and it would depend upon who I was talking to, whether I'd say yes or whether I'd say no. Sometimes I'd weave a really good story about how it was named after us, and other times I would just admit that it really wasn't a mill on the lake. But my dad pitched for the University of Wisconsin, and he came out to play a game at Lake Mills where they passed the hat, and the coach from Iowa heard about that and had him declared a professional. So he couldn't play at the university anymore. It broke his heart. He left the UW for a while and finally did come back and graduate.
So what year would that have been?
That would have been about 1918, 1919, when he was just a freshman at the university. And when you think that they have the stadium at Memorial High School named after Danny Mansfield, who was a tremendous baseball coach. I can remember him coming out to Lake Mills and refereeing games and seeing him.
Right.
And but they can, and we've got the Brewers and we've got the Appleton program, but we won't have any baseball at the UW. So I'm hoping that the new athletic director will concentrate on that. He said his main objective now was to work around the COVID problem.
Right.
But I was hoping he could walk and chew gum at the same time and maybe do two things to get baseball back. So who knows? Another interesting, my great-great-grandfather, Philander Everson, who came on the stagecoach to Ascalon with several others in a caravan, went to a conference or convention for Abraham Lincoln, and on the way his horses shied and threw him out of the buggy, and he died at that. Died a couple of years later a couple of days later after his injury, and so his son was just 19, William Everson, who took over all of his holdings that he had, and William was credited with doing a lot with the Holstein uh, cows in this area, and there was this big sales barn on the corner of on the way to Jefferson on the south side of Lake Mills, and they used to ship cattle on, of course at that time it was all by boat, but they'd send them to Germany and Japan, and because they were such outstanding cattle
That would have been in the 1850s and 60s, and when they were shipping them out, I guess?
well, let's see, my dad remembers having to stay up there with a jackknife when he was 12, so he would have been 12 in 1912, and so he was supposed to stay there, and if any of the cows threw their stanchions or got mixed up in their halters and things, he was to cut them free with his jackknife.
Right.
I remember that story, the telling about that. And we have some gifts that I have received, been handed down to me, that we got from the people in Japan that received some of those cattle. And of course they must have gone by boat.
Well, I was thinking like 1850s and 60s, that's when the 19-year-old would have inherited everything.
Yeah.
And then he built it up from there.
Yeah. So the other side of my family, the Stetson side of the family, came to the Oakland area, and they eventually moved into Lake Mills, and they developed what we call Stetson's Point. And there were all these cottages on the point. There were 8 of them. Well, the 8th one was actually a log cabin that my dad and uncle built, and my uncle had been working at the telephone company in Sun Prairie, so they used telephone poles to build the log cabin. And the log cabin is still there today with a few revisions to make it a little more livable, but it's still in its place on Stetson's Point. My dad and uncle built the house, the cottage on the point. We always called it the Point. And then my dad sold it to my uncle so he could start developing land over in Shorewood Hills. So he started over in Shorewood Hills about 1942, and I have an original plat that they drew up, which doesn't look anything like it is today, but they had it all platted out. And actually, they gave some section of it, they now call it Mill Dallas Shores, but it's actually Mill with an O, Mildred, M-I-L-J-O-L-A, for Mildred and John Last, and that's that they still spell it wrong today.
Oh, I always assumed it was some Latvian or Finnish name or something.
Somewhat.
I see the M-I-L-J-A. I assume it was like some Latvian or Finnish name or something.
My dad was always putting things together. They had a bridge club that they called Gnertzes because he put the last letters of everybody's
Oh,
name in.
okay.
And so he was always doing that. So I know that that was Mildred and John Last, because when he was helping develop Shorewood Hills, he gave that section down where Mill Dallas Shores is to the realty company, to Margaret and John, or Mildred and John, to develop. So it's supposed to be J-O in there.
So Stetson's Point, was that like established like it's just like a family spot, or was it a vacation spot?
Do you not know where Stetson's Point is?
Well, I know where it is on the lake. Somebody pointed it out to me, but
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was significant for anything beyond being named Stetson's Point.
Well, there were 7 cottages. My great-grandpa bought that it was 1909, I think, and then he died in 1912, so he didn't own it too long, but then it came down to the family. So there were all these houses along the lake. There were 7 of them, and they were all rental properties. And so we were in the rental business for a long, long time, and also when we started over in Shorewood Hills, we were renting those cottages out too. So, and Stetson's Point, my dad sold his half out to Kenneth Stetson, his brother-in-law, and it got out of the family because he refused to sell it to either one of his brothers. His two brothers both wanted to buy it, but he sold it to Dr. Reed from Watertown. So that got out of the family. So
was that did that cause any big friction among the brothers?
I can't hear you very well.
Did that cause a lot of friction among the brothers?
Yes, it did. It did. The beginning of the estrangement in that family. So that was kind of a tough time. And eventually all those cottages that are there were sold to individual people, and they were turned into more permanent homes. So I have pictures of what it looked like, and of course behind them all they had outhouses.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Outhouses where we had a dog named Scamper that would get to sit in front of the outhouses and not let the people and I remember my dad telling about when he was a kid on Halloween that there was a family on South Main Street, and I don't know their last name, but my dad would say every so often when they'd go up there, they'd hear the mother say, "There she goes again, Godfrey." And they knocked over the outhouse, so that was quite an adventure in Halloween.
So going back to Halloween, you said you followed your sister around. She was older, I assume?
She was 2 years older, and her group went around doing all the bad things that I don't know when did the treat start on Halloween?
I don't know.
I have no idea when it started to be just a treat, but in my day it was really a trick. And so they did all these things to all the bad things, and then our group, which was 2 years younger, and we had about 3 or 4 of us that went around and fixed everything up that they had ruined.
What motivated you to follow them and do that?
Well, we just decided to be good kids.
Right.
Well, there was a time that Bob Petruska and others broke into the gym one day.
Right.
And because we didn't have anything to do, so we wanted to play in the gym. So our punishment for that was to rake the school lawn for the rest of the fall. And so we did that. And one time, when I was a junior in high school, I took a physics class with the seniors. It was juniors and seniors, and there was the superintendent was the teacher, Mr. Fazzard. And of course, in the morning, he would always have some things to attend to. So we were going to take our exam at the end of the year, and we got to talking, "Are you ready for the exam?" "No, we're not ready for the exam." So I went down and I locked the superintendent out. and then when he came up, he just rattled the door, and he went back and he came over the loudspeaker and he said, "Well, I don't care if you don't want to take your exam today. The seniors won't graduate, and the juniors will all flunk the course." So of course, we all pledged that we wouldn't tell who locked the door. And I felt so guilty. I went home at noon and told my sister, and she laughed out loud. And so I was really upset, and I went back to school after lunch, and I went in and said to Mr. Brizard, "I was the one that locked you out, and I'm really sorry. Please let the seniors graduate." And he just looked at me and said, "I think you've suffered enough already, Mary."
Yeah.
And I thought, in today's world, I would have been expelled for two weeks or something for doing something like that.
Right.
And he was such an understanding person. He knew that how it had affected me seriously. So that was another little adventure we had when I was in school.
Do you remember what your grade was?
What?
Do you remember what your grade was?
Well, I ended up on high honors, so it must have been fairly good.
So it must have been pretty good.
He didn't dock me, I don't think, on the, which is another sign that he was a really I think he went west and became, went to Chico College. I'm not just sure, but he was an outstanding administrator.
Right.
So the other thing that my daughter was reminding me of was when I used to go down to get groceries in Lake Mills. And we'd go down to the grocery store, and you'd hand the list to the clerk, and she would go all, I can still remember this little lady going all the way around picking up all the groceries, and I could take them home, but didn't have to pay for them. She'd send my mother a bill at the end of the month.
Right.
So you never had to do any shopping yourself, but the clerks would run around and pick everything up for you.
And that was the store that was on the main block on Main Street, right?
Yes, the one, the Joneses lived next door to us on College Street, and they had the one, I think, what's his name? Who's the one that has Fargo Manson? Jim, no. Anyway, they have a novelty shop of some sort in that corner now.
Right.
It's been a number of different things over the years.
Oh, but it was on the corner.
It was on the corner,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
And they had several sons. One son was Smiley. They call him Smiley. And he had a motorcycle with a sidecar on it. And so he'd do all the delivering. When I was down there, he'd give me a ride home in the sidecar because he lived right next door to me. So,
Was it pretty common for people to just have nicknames that everybody would know them by?
I think Lake Mills was the biggest nickname place I've ever heard. We had Bumper and Scud and Whizzer and I can't think of any more right now. Of course, Sticky.
Yeah.
My dad. They always questioned how my dad happened to get that nickname, and some people thought it was because when he played first base, he would get the ball would stick in his glove, and then they had some other reason. But actually what happened was when he was all dressed up going to Sunday school one morning, slipped off his pony into the puddle of mud, and they called him Stick in the Mud, and it got down to Sticky. That's how he got his nickname. Anyway, so I don't know if there's much else that I can tell you about.
Well, so you graduated from high school in
1947.
47, and then you went to UW. Did a lot of your family get? For nowadays, it's a big tradition for everybody in some families to go to UW.
Well, and I know that my grandmother, Fanny Everson, took courses there, and both my parents graduated from UW. My sister and I both graduated, and most of my kids have graduated from there. So
Right.
that's you're right. They tend to go to the same spot.
So, what was college like?
College.
It was college.
And then when I came, after my husband died and I came to Madison, I thought if I'm going to go back to take some courses, I might just as well be in grad school and work toward my master's. So I signed up for in grad school, and I was scared to death I was going to have to take that test to get into grad school. And I hadn't done anything academically for 20 years. Anyway, I got the answer that I didn't have to take the test because I had good grades the last time I was there. So
Well, when did you get married? Was that while you were in college, or?
that was the end. I graduated from college in 1950, first time in 51, and we were married in the fall of 51.
So you met him at school?
And Cal had got his master's that same year in marketing and merchandising and insurance, and then he ended up teaching in Green Bay. And so we lived in Green Bay during the Lombardi era.
Right.
And Bart Starr got to be a good friend of the family because his boys and my boys were in Indian Guides together.
Oh.
And Bart Starr was, what a tremendous person he was. He kept track of me after Cal died, and when I came back to Madison, he sent my class signed to the class from Bart Starr, and he gave my kids all a picture. And today they charge, how much do they charge
Yeah.
for pictures? It's unbelievable.
So how long were you in Green Bay then?
We were in Green Bay for 10 years,
Okay, and then your husband passed away?
and he passed away unexpectedly. He had a heart attack. And,
That must have been incredibly tough.
well, it was tough. It was tough. Yeah. So what we managed it. I had a friend. I wasn't sure what I should be doing. After that, to get my teaching certification, I'd have to go back to update my credentials.
Right.
And I didn't know what area to go into at that point. I was a political science and English minor the first time around. Anyway, I had a good friend that would say, you've got a head full of ifs. If he this, if he that, if he this, and if he that. She said, all you need to do is take the first step and see where that leads you. So I came back to school, and seeing I had been doing some homebound teaching, I signed up for the special ed. And then she said, I just told you to take the first step, and you've been running down the road ever.
Was that, well, I mean, your husband died, you were up in Green Bay, and then packed yourself and 5 kids up and down to Madison.
Yes.
That's a big decision. To me, it seems that way.
Well, it was a major decision, and a lot of it depended on the fact that my oldest daughter, Kathy, was going to be through with junior high and be
Right.
starting senior high. And Jeff was going to be starting, he was out of elementary and going into, so I figured that if I was ever going to, it would be much harder to leave if the kids got started in their
Right.
advanced classes. So we came back down to Madison, and Jeff started at Memorial in junior high, but then Memorial switched to Jefferson. Is that the way that went? And then so Jeff went back to Jefferson, and then finally graduated from Memorial. So
Right.
all the kids have graduated from Memorial. And now my second daughter, teaches there. And
Oh.
she's probably been on the staff the longest of anybody at Memorial.
Oh, wow.
She teaches English as a second language. She speaks Spanish very well, and she still speaks some Japanese. She lived in Japan for 12 years.
Oh, wow.
So,
So you were in Madison for quite a while for all the kids to go through high
yeah,
school.
and then I moved out here, and I commuted from here for quite a while.
Oh,
So I was able to get to, Shanks is on the east side, and so I was able to get to Shanks.
so which schools did you teach at for Madison?
Shanks Middle School is now called Whitehorse
Uh-huh.
on the east side. And I called up the principal one time. I couldn't get my garage door open because it had frozen. I said, I don't suppose you hear this excuse very often, but I'm going to be late. And then I poured all the hot water down there and got my feet just so soaking wet. Finally got there about a half an hour later.
Boy.
So I think that's about all that I can think of to say.
Well, so how many years did you teach at Madison?
18 years I was teaching there. And I commuted for a while, and then moved out to the place where I'm living now. We had all of that as rental property until I decided to move out permanently.
Right.
And we had rental property all over the Sessons Point, and then we built a cottage. My dad built a cottage in 1951 right next door to me.
Right.
And that was rented too. But this past year we winterized it. It was something that we'd wanted to do for a long time, and we were finally able to do it because a great big tree put a great big hole in the roof.
Oh, my.
So it was kind of a bittersweet experience. We we figured as long as we had to repair so much because of the tree, the hole in the roof, we might just as well take the time to get the place winterized. So we got that done this year.
So you taught, well, let's see, you went back to school, and then you must have been early to mid-30s when you started teaching again?
Yeah, well, yes, let's see, I went back to school I was 39 when Cal died. I went back to school 40, 41. Yeah. When I went back to school, they were not preparing learning disabilities people. The only two choices I had in special ed was physically handicapped and mentally retarded.
Right.
They were not preparing teachers for emotionally disturbed or learning disabilities or physically handicapped, and that was in 1969. And Madison was a outstanding example for special education. So we had visitors from all over everywhere, all the time. Every time I'd go to the door, there'd be somebody else that wanted to come in and observe our classes. And I took over this class after this gal had a nervous breakdown. And I took it over before I was quite finished with my training at the UW. So I can remember my student, or my professor that was monitoring my student teaching was sitting there. And he said, I've never seen a situation like this, because we had what we call self-contained integrated there. Some kids were able to go into regular classes and others had to stay in, and so we had people coming and going all the time.
Right.
And he said, I can't imagine this. This is an awful situation. We'll never make it work.
So this was, you were on your student teaching assignment,
Yeah.
and the main teacher had a breakdown,
Yeah,
and then they just put you in charge?
right. And I wasn't quite finished with my training.
Right.
I was helping at, I don't know what they call it, practice teaching at Memorial High School. And then when she had her nervous breakdown, they put me over there right away, and right over at Shank.
I'm surprised they would just take, you were essentially a student. I mean,
Yeah, right.
you were older, so it's not like they'd put a 21-year-old in charge, but
It's what we call a retread.
a retread, yeah. And because I got to thinking about that, just because over the past few years my kids have been in school, the special ed programs have changed a lot and improved a lot and altered. It must have been.
Well, and of course there was no such thing as virtual business. My daughter deals with that all the time.
Right.
Sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's not, and sometimes her students show up and sometimes they don't, and so.
Yeah. But what are some of the things that have changed as far as special ed education from when you started?
It's changed?
Yeah, during your career.
Well, for the longest time, I just had what we called educable, and those were people who were borderline. They weren't real. The other category was trainable. So I had the educable. And the problem with that group is that they're smart enough to know they're not smart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hardest thing for them to do, because then they have to come on the special bus, and they have to, everybody in the school knows that they come to my room, and that's tough. Then we started getting physically handicapped. And then I had some, my theory is that you can't be in the class for mentally retarded without being a little emotionally disturbed. So,
Yeah.
so I had the emotionally disturbed kids too. And then we got the physically handicapped eventually, and I had kids that were running their wheelchairs with their shins and other physical problems. I had one student that had been born with no arms and no legs, and so we had he was relatively mentally okay, he just missed out on so much because he'd been in the hospital so much with surgeries all this time.
Right.
And he did get a prosthesis on his arm. Anyway, we got him fixed up. He was able to wiggle down with his hips, and he was in a bucket with dowels down to his feet, his flat boards for his shoes. So we finally got him with a pair of sweatpants on and a pair of pretend shoes on, and so he looked much more normal. And I had him for 3 years, and the people that wanted to put him in the trainable deal, which would mean that those people in the trainable program were going out on vocational sites and getting taught to have full jobs.
Right.
Well, my theory was they've got the rest of their lives to work. They needed to have the experience of a regular school system and get used to handling things and getting along with kids. So one time I submitted a minority report on what they call as MPs, when you get the psychologist and the social worker and everybody together to analyze these kids for IEPs.
Right.
And I submitted a minority report only once. And anyway, then they came out to reevaluate him, and I was right. The Weissman Center and other people decided that he shouldn't be in the trainable. And the best thing that ever happened to me as a teacher, after 3 years of having that child in school, his mother was going to take him home the last day, and she said, "Can I give you a hug?"
Yeah.
That was the best thing that happened to me as a teacher. I just thought that was, and I hear from them every Christmas. I still hear, and he ended up passing away of Reye's syndrome, that illness that get with aspirin sometimes. I don't know how, is it Reye's or Reyes?
I've heard it before, but I can't recall
Yeah.
what it is. It sounds like when you were doing that, they just took anybody who had any kind of disability and they put them in your classroom. Whether they were academically or average or above, they would just give them to you.
Yeah. So that's my life story in a nutshell.
It's only scratching the surface. It's only scratching the surface.
Well, yes, there were a few other situations. Then I joined Rotary,
When you
and
joined
then I
Rotary.
met Gerard.
It was probably my first month here. You came in and invited me to Rotary, and then I ended up joining.
And I was the one that didn't.
Yeah, I remember I was doing something in the back office, and I got called, and it was before the renovation. It was down in that front lobby area, and you just invited me over and mentioned that my predecessor had been in the club, and that I should come over.
I'm glad to know that, Gerard. I'd kind of forgotten that.
Yeah.
That makes me feel good. Lots of great people that I met there, and I miss being able to get to those meetings. But
Right. Was there anything about Rotary that you liked the best?
did I like to?
That you enjoyed the most, or you're most proud of being associated with?
Well, when I was in it, I was in charge of some international students that we sent to. We sent one to France and one to. I think the other one went to Italy, but I'm not just sure. But I was in charge of that. I helped with that program. John Mazzillo was president at that time, and we lined up that foreign exchange deal.
Do you remember the kids' names, the students' names?
Well, if you hadn't asked me that right away, I would have.
It would have come up in your head.
Yeah, it would have come up. So. But I just heard, Jeff just told me that Mitch was going to be the Knickerbocker king.
Mitch Evelyn?
Mitch Evelyn, yeah.
That's fitting.
Yeah.
For the recording, Mitch Evelyn came to town and opened a grocery store and immediately got involved in a lot of charitable organizations.
Unbelievable, wasn't it? I said, when I wrote to him after when he was going to be leaving, Lake Mills wouldn't be the same without him here.
No, it wasn't really. And he came and he joined the Rotary Club at about the same time that we had the first annual beer and wine fundraiser.
Uh-huh.
And he pretty much kind of behind the scenes did, I don't know, 75% of the work. Contacting all the vendors and just doing all these things that needed to happen for it to work.
He built his house right behind me out in Sherwood Hills.
Right.
And we used to have the neighbors come in on Wednesday nights so that I would have a chance to get to know people. So my friend would go around and say, can you come on Wednesday night for supper? So he and his partner came down one night for supper, and we were talking about we got to talking somehow about college or education or something. Well, he never did graduate from college, and he said he got involved in DECA, which is Distributive Education of America.
Yeah.
And that's what my husband was starting in Green Bay. He was trying to get that into the high schools and working on that DECA. And that's the first time I'd heard of DECA in years. And
Really?
so Mitch and I were talking about DECA, and he said he started in La Follette High School, and then he ended up he was in the local and national DECAs, and he had his picture taken with Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's such a outstanding individual.
Yeah. Well, that's about the recording time.
Good.
Okay. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay.